What if I told you that one of the most powerful queens in European history, a woman who unified a fractured kingdom, completed an 800-year war, launched the Inquisition, and bankrolled a voyage that accidentally discovered a new continent, might also have made a vow, so revolting, so wildly unsanitary that it echoes through time as one of the strangest tales of royal devotion ever told? Queen Isabella of Castile, the iron-willed monarch, who stood side by side with Ferdinand of Aragon, reportedly swore before God and court that she would not change her undergarments until the last Muslim kingdom in Spain, Granada, was conquered, a vow that, if true, would make her a symbol of religious extremism and medieval body horror. But did this really happen, or is it just another bizarre piece of historical gossip that refuses to die? I'm your host, Cloaked Testament, and this is the time-worn record, where we peel back the velvet curtains of royalty and reveal the uncomfortable truths behind history's most celebrated rulers. Today, we're digging deep into the infamous vow of Queen Isabella, a story as absurd as it is revealing, blending holy war, political power, medieval medicine, and one deeply unfortunate pair of linen underpants. Let's start with the woman herself. Born in 1451, Isabella of Castile entered the world in a kingdom torn by instability. Her father, John II, left a shaky throne, and her half-brother, Henry IV, dubbed Henry the Impotent, was mocked not just for his rumored infertility, but for his inability to govern. Factions warred for influence, succession was a battleground, and Isabella was raised in a world where power had to be taken, not inherited. At 6 years old, she watched Castile splinter into civil war. Her claim to the throne was challenged repeatedly. Attempts were made to marry her off to neutralize her threat, but Isabella wasn't going quietly. At 18, she made her move. In secret, without her brother's consent, she married Ferdinand of Aragon. This wasn't a romance, it was a coup in disguise. By uniting Castile and Aragon, Isabella and Ferdinand created a powerhouse. Together, they rebranded themselves as Los Reyes Católicos, the Catholic monarchs, and launched a mission not just to rule Spain, but to define it. Their dream? One crown, one faith, one Spain. But Spain, at the time, was anything but unified. Muslims had ruled parts of the Iberian Peninsula since the 700s. Christians, Muslims, and Jews coexisted under a delicate balance of tolerance and tension. For centuries, Christian kingdoms had pushed south in a campaign known as the Reconquista. By the time Isabella took power, the endgame was clear. Granada, the final Muslim stronghold, must fall. It wasn't just military conquest, it was religious destiny. And this is where the underwear enters. According to a tale told decades later, Isabella made a sacred vow. She would not change her underclothes, her linen shift, and possibly more for the entire duration of the Granada campaign. Not until Christian banners flew over the Alhambra. Not until the last Muslim emir bowed before her. This wasn't seen as grotesque in its time. It was an act of sacrifice, a queen physically suffering as her soldiers did, proving her divine mission through bodily discomfort. But was it real? To answer that, we need to understand what hygiene meant in the 15th century. People in medieval Europe weren't oblivious to cleanliness. They knew that foul smells often preceded illness, but they misunderstood why. The theory of miasma, bad air, dominated medical thinking. Many believed that bathing too often opened the skin's pores to disease. Doctors actually advised against frequent washing. Instead, linen shifts were worn to absorb sweat and protect outer garments. And those shifts? Even royalty might only own a few. Changing clothes wasn't routine, especially not during war. So the idea that Isabella might have gone months or even years without changing her underclothes isn't completely implausible. And yet, the myth goes further. It claims she wore the same linen for the entire 10-year Granada campaign, from 1482 to 1492, that her tent had to be placed downwind from others, that courtiers drew lots to avoid proximity, that her physicians warned of airborne infection, that when Granada finally fell, her garments were so pungent they were burned. There's no evidence for this in contemporary chronicles. The story appears first in the writings of Gonzalo Fernández de Oviedo. Decades after Isabella's death, Oviedo wasn't known for restraint. He described Isabella as a saintly figure, a martyr of her own making. Protestant historians later picked up the tale, using it to mock Catholic piety. It evolved from sacred legend to satirical folklore. But even if the vow never happened, the myth took root for a reason. Because it feels true. Isabella was not a queen of half measures. When she waged war, she moved into the camps. When she needed funding, she pawned her royal jewels. When she wanted victory, she micromanaged logistics, ordering siege engines, coordinating food supplies, establishing mobile hospitals. She didn't just issue orders from a throne, she walked the battlefield. The Fall of Granada wasn't just military, it was psychological. The campaign took a decade because it wasn't one big battle, it was dozens. Cities like Ronda, Malaga, and Baza fell one by one. The Catholic monarchs tightened their grip like a noose. And while her soldiers battled starvation and disease, Isabella battled on with them, in spirit and in flesh. That's what made the underwear story believable. A queen so devout she'd sacrifice comfort to prove God's favor. But while Isabella's court worried about smells, the real stench was political. In 1478, she and Ferdinand established the Spanish Inquisition, a tool designed to root out false converts, especially Jews who had converted to Christianity to avoid persecution. These conversos were viewed with suspicion. The Inquisition gave legal cover to investigate, torture, and publicly execute them. Its cruelty was legendary, and Isabella's hands were all over it. She didn't merely approve, it was part of her plan for spiritual unity. Cleansing the kingdom wasn't metaphorical, it was literal. In 1492, the year Granada fell, and Columbus set sail, Isabella issued the Alhambra Decree. All Jews in Spain were given a choice convert or leave. Hundreds of thousands were displaced. Thousands died in exile. Entire communities vanished, and those who stayed, many were eventually hunted anyway. And so, while Isabella was allegedly stewing in a decade-old chemise, she was also overseeing one of the largest ethnic expulsions in European history. Then came Columbus. After years of rejections, the Genoese navigator found his backers in the Catholic monarchs. With Granada subdued and Spain's enemies weakened, Isabella had the funds and the religious zeal to send ships west. Columbus believed he'd reach Asia. Instead, he stumbled into the Americas. And with that, Isabella's legacy extended far beyond Spain. She didn't just unify a nation. She helped birth an empire. But like everything else in her reign, the consequences were devastating. Indigenous civilizations were decimated by European disease, conquest, and exploitation. The riches of the New World fueled European wars and monarchies for centuries. And Isabella, who had dreamed of a pure and unified kingdom, now ruled an empire soaked in contradiction, glory, and genocide intertwined. So did she really wear the same underwear for 10 years? Probably not. The vow is almost certainly fiction. But it tells us something real. It reveals how later generations interpreted her fanaticism, her devotion, her iron will. Whether out of reverence or ridicule, the legend persists. Because it fits the person. She was obsessive. She did sacrifice. She was ruthless. And maybe that's the point. The myth of the unwashed queen is more than just a gross joke. It's a symbol of how absolute power, when mixed with absolute certainty, can turn even the smallest detail into legend. Isabella of Castile was a woman who broke every rule. She seized power. She crushed resistance. She cleansed her kingdom. She launched a global age. And whether or not she changed her underwear, she changed the world. So what do you think? Was Isabella a visionary queen who unified a broken land? Or a religious zealot whose obsessions left centuries of scars? Or can she be both? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you liked this deep dive into royal filth, fanaticism, and fact-checking old legends, smash that like button. Subscribe to the Time-Worn Record and ring that bell so you don't miss the next historical scandal. Because sometimes the dirtiest myths reveal the deepest truths.